To Chapter 5. Running into Ryuji near the park worried Noboru. He wondered what he could do to keep the sailor from telling his mother about the meeting. In the first place, he hadn't gone swimming at Kamakura, as the adults supposed. Besides, one of the boys, in the group Ryuji had seen, was the chief. But that wasn't so bad. No one would be able to tell him from the others just by looking. Not a chance. That morning, the boys had left the city with packed lunches and gone all the way to Yamauchi Pier in Kanagawa. For a while, they had roamed around the railroad siding behind the sheds on the wharf, and then held the usual meeting to discuss the uselessness of mankind, the insignificance of life. They liked an insecure meeting place where intrusion was always a possibility. The chief, number 1, number 2, Noboru, who was number 3, number 4, and number 5 were all smallish, delicate boys and excellent students. In fact, most of their teachers lavished praise on this outstanding group, and even held it up as an encouraging example to poorer students. Number 2 had discovered that morning's meeting place and all the others had approved. In back of a large shed marked City Maintenance A, a rusty railroad siding, apparently in long disuse, crawled through high wild chrysanthemums and old abandoned tires across an unkempt field. Far away in the small garden in front of the warehouse office, canna flowers were blazing in the sun. They were dwindling, end of summer flames, but so long as they were visible, the boys didn't feel free of the watchman's eye, so they turned away and followed the siding, back from the shed. The track stopped in front of a black, heavily bolted warehouse door. They discovered to one side of the warehouse a patch of grass, hidden by a high wall of red and yellow and deep brown drums, and sat down. The garish sun was edging toward the summit of the roof, but the little lawn was still in shade. That sailor is terrific. He's like a fantastic beast that's just come out of the sea all dripping wet. Last night I watched him go to bed with my mother. Noboru began an excited account of what he had witnessed the night before. The boys kept their faces blank, but he could feel every eye on him and the straining to catch every word, and he was satisfied. "And that's your hero?" the chief said when he had finished. His thin red upper lip had a tendency to curl when he spoke. "Don't you realize there is no such thing as a hero in this world? But he's different. He's really going to do something." "Oh? Like what, for instance?" "I can't say exactly, but it'll be something terrific." "Are you kidding? A guy like that never does anything. He's probably after your old lady's money. That'll be the punchline. First he'll suck her out of everything she's got, and then bang, bam. See you around, ma'am. That'll be the punchline." "Well, even that's something, isn't it? Something we couldn't do?" "Your ideas about people are still pretty naive," the 13-year-old chief said coldly. "No adult is going to be able to do something we couldn't do. There's a huge seal called impossibility pasted all over this world. And don't ever forget that we're the only ones who can tear it off once and for all." Awe-stricken, the others fell silent. "How about your folks?" the chief asked, turning to number 2. "I suppose they still won't buy you an air rifle?" "Nah, I guess it's hopeless," the boy crooned to himself, arms hugging his knees. "They probably say it would be dangerous, don't they?" "Yes. That's crap." Dimples dented the chief's cheeks, white even in summer. "They don't even know the definition of danger. They think danger means something physical, getting scratched and a little blood running and the newspapers making a big fuss. Well, that hasn't got anything to do with it. Real danger is nothing more than just living. Of course, living is merely the chaos of existence. But more than that, it's a crazy, mixed-up business of dismantling existence, instant by instant. to the point where the original chaos is restored, and taking strength from the uncertainty and the fear that chaos brings to recreate existence instant by instant. You won't find another job as dangerous as that. There isn't any fear in existence itself or any uncertainty, but living creates it, and society is basically meaningless, a Roman mixed bath. And school is just society in miniature. That's why we're always being ordered around. A bunch of blind men tell us what to do, tear our unlimited ability to shreds. But how about the sea? Noboru persisted. How about a ship? Last night I'm sure I caught the meaning of the internal order of life you talked about. I suppose the sea is permissible to a certain extent. The chief took a deep breath of the salt breeze blowing in between the sheds. As a matter of fact, it's probably more permissible than any of the few other permissible things. I don't know about a ship, though. I don't see why a ship is any different from a car. Because you don't understand. Is that right? An expression of chagrin at this blow to his pride appeared between the chief's thin, crescent-shaped eyebrows. Their artificial look, as though they were painted on, was the barber's fault. He insisted, despite the chief's protestations, on shaving his brow and above his eyelids. Is that right? Since when? Is it your place to tell me what I understand and what I don't? Come on, let's eat. Number 5 was a quiet, gentle boy. They had just unwrapped their lunches on their laps when Noboru noticed a shadow fall across the lawn and looked up in surprise. The old watchman from the warehouse, his elbows propped on a drum, was peering in at them. You boys sure picked a messy place for a picnic. With admirable poise, the chief beamed a scrubbed schoolboy smile at the old man and said, "Would it be better for us to go somewhere else? We came down to watch the ships, and then we were looking for a shady place to have lunch." Go right ahead. You're not doing any harm. Just be sure not to leave any litter around. Yes, sir. The smiles were boyish, innocent. You don't have to worry about that. We're hungry enough to eat the wrappings and everything, right, you guys? They watched the hunchback shuffle down the path, treading the border between sunlight and shadow. Number 4 was the first to speak. There are plenty of that type around, about as common as you can get, and he just loves the youngsters. I'll bet he felt so generous just now. The boys shared the sandwiches and raw vegetables and little cakes in their lunches and drank iced tea from small thermos bottles. A few sparrows flew in over the siding and alighted just outside their circle, but no one shared even a crumb with the birds. Matchless inhumanity was a point of pride with every one of them. These were children from good homes, and their mothers had packed them rich and varied lunches. Noboru was a little ashamed of the plainish sandwiches he had brought. They sat cross-legged on the ground, some in shorts, some in dungarees. The chief's throat labored painfully as he wolfed his food. It was very hot. Now the sun was flaming directly above the warehouse roof, the shallow eaves barely protecting them. Noboru munched his food in nervous haste, a habit his mother often scolded him for, squinting upward into the glare as he ate, as if to catch the sun in his open mouth. He was recalling the design of the perfect painting he had seen the night before. It had been almost a manifestation of the absolutely blue sky of night. The chief maintained that there was nothing new to be found anywhere in the world, but Noboru still believed in the adventure lurking in some tropical backland, and he believed in the many-colored market at the hub of clamor and confusion in some distant seaport, in the bananas and parrots sold from the glistening arms of black natives. You're daydreaming while you eat, aren't you? That's a child's habit. Noboru didn't answer. He wasn't equal to the scorn in the chief's voice. Besides, he reasoned, getting mad would only look silly because they were practicing absolute dispassion. Noboru had been trained in such a way that practically nothing sexual, not even that scene the night before, could surprise him. The chief had taken great pains to ensure that none of the gang would be abashed by such a sight. Somehow he had managed to obtain photographs picturing intercourse in every conceivable position and a remarkable selection of pre-coital techniques, and explained them all in detail, warmly instructing the boys about the insignificance, the unworthiness of such activity. Ordinarily, a boy with merely a physical edge on his classmates presides at lessons such as these, but the chief's case was altogether different. He appealed directly to the intellect. To begin with, he maintained that their genitals were for copulating with stars in the Milky Way. Their pubic hair, indigo roots buried deep beneath white skin, and a few strands already strong and thickening, would grow out in order to tickle coy stardust when the rape occurred. This kind of hallowed raving enchanted them, and they disdained their classmates. Foolish, dirty, pitiful boys brimming with curiosity about sex. "When we finish eating, we'll go over to my place," the chief said. "Everything's all ready for you-know-what. Got a cat?" "Not yet, but it won't take long to find one. Nothing will take long." Since the chief's house was near Noboru's, they had to take a train again to get there. The boys liked this sort of unnecessary, troublesome excursion. The chief's parents were never home. His house was always hushed. A solitary boy, he had read at 13 every book in the house, and was always bored. He claimed he could tell what any book was about just by looking at the cover. There were indications that this hollow house had nourished the chief's ideas about the overwhelming emptiness of the world. Noboru had never seen so many entrances and exits, so many prim, chilly rooms. The house even made him afraid to go to the bathroom alone. Foghorns in the harbor echoed emptily from room to empty room. Sometimes, ushering the boys into his father's study and sitting down in front of a handsome Morocco leather desk set, the chief would write out topics for discussion, moving his pen importantly between inkwell and copper-engraved stationery. Whenever he made a mistake, he would crumple the thick imported paper and toss it carelessly away. Once Noboru had asked, "Won't your old man get mad if you do that?" The chief had rewarded him with silence and a derisive smile. But they all loved a large shed in the garden in back where they could go without passing under the butler's eye. Except for a few logs and some shelves full of tools and empty wine bottles and back issues of foreign magazines, the floor of the shed was bare. And when they sat down on the damp, dark earth, its coolness passed directly to their buttocks. After hunting for an hour, they found a stray cat small enough to ride in the palm of Noboru's hand, a mottled, mewing kitten with lackluster eyes. By then they were sweating heavily, so they undressed and took turns splashing in a sink in one corner of the shed. While they bathed, the kitten was passed around. Noboru felt the kitten's hot heart pumping against his wet, naked chest. It was like having stolen into the shed with some of the dark, joy-flushed essence of bright summer sunlight. "How are we going to do it?" "There's a log over there. We can smack it against that. It'll be easy." "Go ahead, number 3. At last, the test of Noboru's hard, cold heart. Just a minute before, he had taken a cold bath, but he was sweating heavily again. He felt it blow up through his breast like the morning sea breeze, intent to kill. His chest felt like a clothes rack made of hollow metal poles and hung with white shirts drying in the sun. Soon, the shirts would be flapping in the wind, and then he would be killing, breaking the endless chain of society's loathsome taboos. Noboru seized the kitten by the neck and stood up. It dangled dumbly from his fingers. He checked himself for pity. like a lighted window seen from an express train. It flickered for an instant in the distance and disappeared. He was relieved. The chief always insisted it would take acts such as this to fill the world's great hollows. Though nothing else could do it, he said. Murder would fill those gaping caves in much the same way that a crack along its face will fill a mirror. Then they would achieve real power over existence. Resolved, Noboru swung the kitten high above his head and slammed it at the log. The warm, soft thing hurtled through the air in marvelous flight. But the sensation of down between his fingers lingered. "It's not dead yet. Do it again," the chief ordered. Scattered through the gloom in the shed, the 5 naked boys stood rooted, their eyes glittering. What Noboru lifted between 2 fingers now was no longer a kitten. A resplendent power was surging through him to the tips of his fingers, and he had only to lift the dazzling arc seared into the air by this power and hurl it again and again at the log. He felt like a giant of a man. Just once, at the second impact, the kitten raised a short, gurgling cry. The kitten had bounced off the log for the final time. Its hind legs twitched, traced large, lax circles in the dirt floor, and then subsided. The boys were overjoyed at the spattered blood on the log. As if staring into a deep well, Noboru peered after the kitten as it plummeted down the small hole of death. He sensed in the way he lowered his face to the corpse his own gallant tenderness so clinical it was almost kind. Dull red blood oozed from the kitten's nose and mouth. The twisted tongue was clamped against the palate. "Come on up close where you can see. I'll take it from here." Unnoticed, the chief had put on a pair of rubber gloves that reached up to his elbows. Now he bent over the corpse with a pair of gleaming scissors. Shining coolly through the gloom of the shed, the scissors were magnificent in their cold, intellectual dignity. Noboru couldn't imagine a more appropriate weapon for the chief. Seizing the kitten by the neck, the chief pierced the skin at the chest with the point of the blade and scissored a long, smooth cut to the throat. Then he pushed the skin to the sides with both hands. The glossy layer of fat beneath was like a peeled spring onion. The skinned neck, draped gracefully on the floor, seemed to be wearing a cat mask. The cat was only an exterior. Life had posed as a cat. But beneath the surface was a smooth, expressionless interior. A placid, glossy white inner life in perfect consonance with Noboru and the others. And they could feel their own intricate, soot-black insides bearing down upon and shadowing it, like ships moving upon the water. Now at last the boys and the cat, or more accurately, what had been a cat, became perfectly at one. Gradually, the endoderm was bared. Its transparent mother-of-pearl loveliness was not at all repellent. They could see through to the ribs now and watch, beneath the great omentum, the warm, homey pulsing of the colon. "What do you think? Doesn't it look too naked?" "I'm not sure that's such a good thing. Like it was bad manners or something." The chief peeled aside the skin on the trunk with his gloved hands. "It sure is naked," said number 2. Noboru tried comparing the corpse confronting the world so nakedly with the unsurpassably naked figures of his mother and the sailor. But compared to this, they weren't naked enough. They were still swaddled in skin. Even that marvelous horn in the great wide world whose expanse it had limbed couldn't possibly have penetrated so deeply as this. The pumping of the bared heart placed the peeled kitten in direct and tingling contact with the kernel of the world. Noboru wondered, pressing a crumpled handkerchief to his nose against the mounting stench and breathing hotly through his mouth. What is beginning here now? The kitten bled very little. The chief tore through the surrounding membrane and exposed the large, red-black liver. Then he unwound the immaculate bowels and reeled them onto the floor. Steam rose and nestled against the rubber gloves. He cut the colon into slices and squeezed out for all the boys to see a broth the color of lemons. This stuff cuts just like flannel. Noboru managed, while following his own dreamy thoughts, to pay scrupulous attention to the details. The kitten's dead pupils were purple, flecked with white. The gaping mouth was stuffed with congealed blood, the twisted tongue visible between the fangs. As the fat yellowed scissors cut them, he heard the ribs creak, and he watched intently, while the chief groped in the abdominal cavity, withdrew the small pericardium, and plucked from it the tiny oval heart. When he squeezed the heart between two fingers, the remaining blood gushed onto his rubber gloves, reddening them to the tips of the fingers. What is really happening here? Noboru had withstood the ordeal from beginning to end. Now his half-dazed brain envisioned the warmth of the scattered viscera and the pools of blood in the gutted belly, finding wholeness and perfection in the rapture of the dead kitten's large, languid soul. The liver, limp beside the corpse, became a soft peninsula, the squashed heart a little sun, the reeled-out bowels a white atoll, and the blood in the belly, the tepid waters of a tropical sea. Death had transfigured the kitten into a perfect, autonomous world. I killed it all by myself. A distant hand reached into Noboru's dream and awarded him a snow-white certificate of merit. I can do anything, no matter how awful. The chief peeled off the squeaky rubber gloves and laid one beautiful white hand on Noboru's shoulder. You did a good job. I think we can say this has finally made a real man of you, and isn't all this blood a sight for sore eyes?